Nothing
Okay, good morning, everyone.
Good morning,
We're recording.
Rabbi.
Yes, Carol.
I was talking to my daughter last night, Dr. Ellen Hirsch, and she was just saying to me that medical schools no longer have their freshman medical students do take human skeletons for biology in their first year. So that's no longer happening, and most medical schools no longer take bodies. They'll take individual organs for surgeons who are using those organs, but not whole bodies.
Okay,
Just
thank you. That is
Join
something new for us.
new meeting.
No, but you said that they do appreciate people who
How do you join?
organs, which we're talking about organs which are not necessarily used for transplant, but would be used for educational purposes.
Yeah.
Okay, well, thank you for that. And again, something that would be, as we saw last week, not required, but certainly admirable, right? We had that difference between chovah, which is a word that would, or mitzvah, which would say you have to do it, versus the term that was a midat chasidut, an act of kindness that would encourage those types of donations. Thank you. So now we have more information. Good morning. I see Simma's here now. Okay, so this week,
Good morning.
morning, Simma. Okay, now this week we're going to talk about that other new teshuva that the Rabbinical Assembly produced. And let me just do the share screen. And here we go. Okay, make that a little bit bigger. It's too big. How's that? Everybody see the screen?
Yes.
Okay, good. Now, what we have here is something that, in a sense, we've had some discussion with before. And there's a question as a rabbi that I commonly get. Rabbi, my doctor wants to implant a new valve in my heart, but the valve comes from a pig, right? Can we do that? Now, of course, there is not only is there an emotional element of pigs, which, by the way, there's a brand new book about pigs and in Judaism, which sounds fascinating. I just learned about it this morning.
Is my picture on there someplace?
Yeah.
Okay.
Siggy, we can hear you. And
I'm
we
sorry.
can see you. Okay.
Okay.
Good. Okay. So this question of the valve, but let's go further. How many of you would feel comfortable if you needed a transplant of an organ, if you needed a kidney from, say, a pig? Okay. Would you feel comfortable?
of course.
How about a heart? What do you think the average Jew in the street would say?
I would say anything that prolonged my life.
Okay. Do you think there might be some Jews out there who would say, wait a second,
Right.
what are we creating here? What are we doing? Was this kosher? If it was, we have this teshuva because actually somebody I actually know, it's written by there it is, Rabbi Shai Cherry, who was actually a teacher at Vanderbilt University at one point, and he was a member of my congregation in New Jersey. After he left Nashville, he went on to Los Angeles, and he actually went to rabbinical school and was ordained as he's now a colleague. And he wrote this teshuva, and this is a word I will admit I'd never seen this word before. Xenotransplantation. Okay, that's the terminology that they're using. Okay, new to me, but I think it's something that we'll probably be hearing more about in the future. Note that the teshuva was voted on just last June, less than 6 months ago. And here's the vote. Well, I'm always interested in the votes, and especially when we get into our next topic, we'll be very interested in the votes. 18-0. In other words, unanimously passed by the Committee of Jewish Law and Standards. No abstentions, no against. So that's an indication of how. Now, yes, there's that general sense, which I think, Harry, you accurately said, if it's going to preserve my life, let's go and do it, right? But we have to recognize there are some issues involved. Yes, there is that sort of gut feeling among some people. Hey, what are you doing putting a pig's, it's one thing to put a little valve. It's another thing to put a whole organ. And not only that, there are a number of issues that go beyond, is it saving life? But we need to look at some of the details at first. So what Rabbi Cherry is doing is he trying to say, okay, let's go back, step back, and look at this whole situation. And how much is this a reality today, right? How commonly often or do we hear? Are there animal organs being transplanted into humans at this point? Well, he's going to show you what the latest is. And this, again, I say it's, over a lot like 6 months ago. Medical science, as we know, moves very rapidly. So even what he has here, I would argue, could be out of date. Okay, so here's the question. Is the use of non-human animal tissues, organs, all organs, glands for grafts and transplantation in humans, called xenografts and xenotransplantation, permissible by Jewish law? If permissible, are there any restrictions or concern? Good point. Okay. Here's the background. 17 people die each and every day in the United States awaiting organ transplants. By the way, have you all signed up as an organ donor on your driver's license? I hope you have. You should be. It's very important. Even if you're older, like I am, still there are skin and cornea. There are other parts that can be used, perhaps not whole organs, but you should, as we learned earlier, that's again a common myth in Jewish circles, but we looked at that previously. Yes, you can be an organ donor, even though it's not going to delay burial because they want to take the organs quickly. And yes, it is. You might argue, is it a desecration? We had the terminology with donating a body to medical science. Is it a nivul hamet, desecration of the body, which is opposed to kavod hamet, which is honoring the body? And the rabbis say no. And then you sometimes hear that other objection. Well, what's going to happen when God resurrects everybody, and I'm missing a kidney? What's going to be? And so which the rabbis say, look, if God can resurrect everybody, don't worry about your kidney, God will figure it out. Okay. So there are 103,000 people waiting the donor list. Gary Har, as we all know, prominent member of our congregation, was very fortunate. He received a kidney. He was there at the high holidays, and he was extremely thankful that they were able to find a match donor. That's not hard. And as you all know, I needed a match donor for my blood, my bone marrow, which was not on the list. So they had to do a bit more risky procedure, which fortunately succeeded. But that's another thing you should be. Bone marrow donors, you just swab your cheek and send it to Minneapolis, and they put you on the list. Okay. The gap between need and availability is wide. Interesting. People point out many patients don't even make it to the list, and they die. Okay. So there was this teshuva in the past, permissible like non-kosher animal parts. But now, in January 22, there was a pig to human kidney transplant. March of 24, a couple months ago, pig to human liver transplant. Okay. So we understand that xenotransplantation, even with a pig organ, would be justifiable in halacha under the rubric of, as we've seen, pikuach nefesh, saving a life, an action that might save human life. And it's even become more possible. He goes into this the question of, oops, sorry, did I? Yeah, I think I went. Whoops, I think I went too far. Yeah, where did I go? Okay. Yeah, here we are. Where we now have something called CRISPR gene editing to knock out deleterious genes and insert salutary genes for a variety of medical therapies. So in other words, they can even genetically alter the organs to make that more possible. So you had pig to heart human transplant in January 22, 10 gene modifications, and others have been happening. Okay. But first, he says, prior to determining whether it's okay by Jewish law, the research and medical communities must approve the procedures. In other words, is it okay medically? And he points out the need for organs, the consequences for the lack. If xenotransplantation is permissible, it should be utilized to save lives. Tomorrow, we consider the pursuit and utilization of synthetic organs. Wouldn't it be nice if we had a synthetic organ? You didn't even have to use an animal organ. That would be great, but we're not at that point. By the way, let me step back. Another important issue, just to since I'm here, wouldn't it be nice if the default position on driver's license is I will be an organ donor, and you had to opt out of that? In countries in Europe where that is the case, the number of organ donors and lives saved has significantly changed. That's not just something to bear in mind that would be nice. Okay. So he points out, here we go. There are other issues. Until there are enough xeno hearts, xeno kidneys, and xeno livers for all, how do you distribute them? Remember, we talked about triage was one of the first issues we talked about during the COVID epidemic. Not enough respirators, not enough drugs. Well, what if there are some, but not enough? He's not even going to deal with this, but he points out that that is an issue that we should think about. And there's another issue, contagion. The possibility of transmitting viral disease from the donor animal to the human host, and the potential for zoonotic, I'm not an expert on that word, transmission to other people is a major concern. What if the organ has within it some sort of virus or other pathogen that now is being transmitted to a human who then can transmit it to others, right? The question of prohibition of exposing danger. This I did not know. Weeks after the death of the first xeno heart recipient, it was discovered that the xeno heart had been infected with, and I'm not going to pronounce this one either, porcine cytomegalovirus, a pathogen known to have catastrophic consequences. Although the donor pig had been tested for the virus, the testing appears to have tested the pig's snout for the virus, but often is lurking, excuse me, deeper in the tissues. So here already is one issue, so they have to be careful about that. What about animal welfare? Let's ask that. What about animal welfare? How should we go about raising animals whose fate is to be slaughtered and their organs used for human transplant? Is that okay? Well, what issues might there be? Irene?
Well, we slaughter animals now for food.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't think the issue is, and that animal could probably be used for food, you know. I just think, I don't know. That's the answer, but we slaughter animals all the time if we don't
Right.
want to slaughter animals for food, and maybe we should slaughter them for medical reasons either.
Okay, well, that's a good question. What happens? There was, he says, the first doctor who did the xeno heart pledged that researchers respected the animal's quality of life to the extent that it can be discerned, but that sensitive and humane animal care practices, such as clean and appropriately stimulating environments, were employed. You may recall when we talked about kosher food, there is a serious issue with the way animals are reared and slaughtered, even for kosher food. And there were some ways in which that could be improved that were that are actually, many of them are being implemented, but that is really an issue, right? They are treated better than their cousins in factory farms. It would be farcical to discuss cruelty to animals in this context when, quote, kosher slaughterhouses operate with such disregard for the living conditions of their product. Indeed, scrutiny of the protocols for animal welfare within the medical research community challenges what current halakha deems acceptable within kosher slaughterhouses. In other words, the ones who are being reared for research are being treated much better than the animals that we eat. Given contemporary halakha's tolerance for the relatively inhumane treatment of these animals for gastronomic satisfaction, we're not as concerned as we should be. We saw that when we discussed this. The acceptability of animal research for pikuach nefesh is a foregone conclusion. This is almost like we eat the animals and they're not treated too well. Well, the animals that are in research facilities, they're treated better, so we don't have to worry about it. But still, that should be and is a concern.
Rabbi?
Yeah, Rini.
I have a small comment. The first time we were in New Zealand, we visited friends who have a dairy farm, and they had a building on the property that the research scientists from Auckland University were doing to prevent seizures in children by implanting something in a child's brain that would, with a remote device that a parent has, would signal that something was going to happen, and they could save traumatic experiences, bad health experiences. Well, they experimented on lambs, and they inserted these devices in lambs, and then it was very clean. It was a real hospital type situation. They let the lambs go back to their mothers, but within a few weeks, they had to kill them and see what happened to their brains. And frankly, it was very disturbing to me. They were cute little lambs, but on the other hand, they were trying to save the lives of human children. So it's a very tricky issue.
Yeah, anybody here eat lamb? Lamb is kosher food. Lamb can be, many people, including myself, don't eat veal. I've stopped eating veal years and years ago because the animals that are slaughtered for veal are young animals and they're not treated very well. I suppose that's hypocritical because I still eat steak, probably, but the veal issue is a real serious one with the way that they're treated. The question is, yes, the animal has to be slaughtered. Is the animal slaughtered in a humane way? That we remember when we looked at that question of whether a certain type of enclosure should be used in the kosher slaughterhouses, and not the hoisting and that was traditionally used, and that actually has changed in most slaughterhouses for kosher animals in America. Still, it's a problem, and I have to admit, I have many friends who are vegetarians, primarily for the issue of how animals are reared. But his argument here is, look, we're not as careful as we should be about kosher animals. We know research animals are treated better. Okay. And he also points out that Judaism is speciesist. Yes, we unapologetically hold that human life is higher value than non-human life. Okay. Therefore, okay. And he knows other context. Rabbi Joel Roth said that the practical issues, the living conditions, given the current conditions under which animal subjects are maintained for the purpose of xenotransplant, my answer is that there is still no limit to how many non-human animals we can experiment upon and possibly kill in order to potentially save human life. Okay, so but there are other questions. If you read the Torah, there's a prohibition about kilayim. The Torah likes things not mixed. Good example, shotness. You shouldn't have a garment with wool and linen. Mixing stuff in it, I'm making this a very great generalization, is something that the rabbis aren't happy with. By the way, where do they get that from? Partially from the beginning of the Bible, right? God, how does God create? God creates by dividing day from night, land from water. We have at the end of Shabbat, Havdalah, Ben Yom HaShishit, the days of the week are so separated from Shabbat. We divide the world in a very odd way as Jews, right? We divide the world between Jews and non-Jews. Jews make up what percentage of the world's population? Gee, that's kind of a little bitty bit. And then we got everybody else. But the idea of divisions and not mixing is something that occurs in Judaism. And that's particularly about certain types of mixing of seeds and plants and crossing plants or even certain cases in fields. So there is a question, but there is this, it has been discussed about genetically engineered foodstuffs, right? GMOs. Can you avoid GMOs nowadays? Do you read the labels to find out if your food has GMOs? I don't, but you almost can't avoid them. What about GMOs? Hey, this is corn that grows faster or has more nutrition, but it's a GMO, genetically modified organism. And previously, the rabbis have said in the conservative movement, the development of the laws of kilayim show an extraordinary tendency towards leniency. So again, he's talking about that. Genetic manipulations. Given that Maimonides carved out an explicit exemption for kilayim when developing medical treatments, and the fact that scientists are extracting and implementing strands of DNA sequences rather than bringing two animal species together to mate, the issue of kilayim isn't applicable in our case, right? The Torah doesn't want different animals to mate. That's very clear. One can imagine that science fiction writers are wont to, a genetically manipulated chimera that might constitute a violation of kilayim, but the therapies under discussion do not approach the threshold of such concern. I have to say, I read that, I take that sentence personally. Do you know what the word chimera means, or maybe mispronouncing it? Chimera comes from a Greek term, a creature that is made up of more than one animal. Okay, and they have, a sphinx, for example. In the world of bone marrow transplants, I'm a chimera. Why? Because the DNA of my blood is not my blood is not my blood. My bone marrow is not my bone marrow, and they actually have a score when you're in the hospital as to how degree to which the marrow is taken. That's the chimera score. And you want that to be high. Okay. Okay. All right. So what other issues? What about Jews and Muslims who may be squeamish about incorporating a porcine organ into their body? There is some evidence in Turkey that there is discomfort among Muslims for receiving porcine xenografts. Anecdotal evidence suggests that there are also Jews who would need to be taught the prohibition concerning pork is restricted to consumption, right? Can you play with the old pigskin on a football field, not to mention what goes into your shoes? That's okay. You're not eating them. Furthermore, both the Buddhist Association of Pigs and the Romantic Association of the Hearts may require pastoral sensitivity and education. Oh, my heart's going to be a pig's heart. I love you with all my pig's heart. It doesn't really sound good. Might have some objection to that. Your comment, Carol?
Yes, a member of my granddaughter's husband family is having a valve replacement next week, And when I asked her if she knew what kind of valve she was getting, all she knew was that it was an animal valve. Didn't occur to the family to ask what kind of animal, and this is a very Jewish family, that it didn't occur to them to ask. Wasn't important to them.
Right. So they are following the concept pikuach nefesh, and don't ask, don't tell. Would they have been upset if doctor said, "Oh, by the way, we're putting in a pig's valve into your heart"? Would they have been upset? Do you think, Carol?
I don't know, but I'm going to Dayton tomorrow to have lunch with them. I'm going to ask.
Well, it's up to you. I'll leave that up to
I'm
you.
going to ask them if they knew it was a pig's valve. Would that bother them?
Up to you. Clearly, the pikuach nefesh overrides those concerns. And again, by the way, this is a good, clear example of something that the rabbis of ancient times specifically would not have known of. No one asked Maimonides about that, but Maimonides would always have said, of course, that pikuach nefesh is of utmost importance. So, but there's still, I believe me, speaking as a rabbi, it's a question I've been asked many, many, many times. Okay, all right. But here's another problem. Pigs are not expected to live more than 20 years. So what if you're young and you get a pig's heart whose lifespan is 20 years? There might be a series. The prospect of future surgeries regarding the recipient's age is one factor among many. The burden of this teshuva is to assure our community that xenotransplantations are halakhically, by Jewish law, permissible. There will always be reasons to decline. So here's his conclusions. The Jewish obligation to heal is unequivocal and a little ambiguous, okay? The physician has permission to heal. We don't have to go into all this detail because, what does the Torah say? He's trying to distinguish, does the physician have a duty? Is he required to heal or just permission? And one rabbi says, the duty of healing is not explicit in the place where the Torah discussed medical costs. It was included in the duty to return lost items. I know that sounds odd. The rabbi who explains this, Rabbi Baruch Halevi Epstein, permission was implicitly given to heal in the Torah's discussion of the liability for medical costs. The mandate to heal was included in the duty to return a lost object. That means that when you return the hashevoto, returning a lost object, return him, obviously in Hebrew, it's either masculine or feminine. The duty to return him, i.e. to restore his health that he has lost. It's a bit of a stretch of interpretation, but the point is they're trying to say that there is an explicit requirement to heal. Just as one can despair of finding a lost object, one can despair of regaining one's health and choose to forego medical treatment, right? The duty to return a lost object falls upon one who is able to return the lost item. He corresponds to the healer who can restore the person to health. If they have the ability to heal and prevent themselves from doing so, they are the spilling blood. There is no obligation upon the one who lost the item or who is ill, i.e., we cannot obligate a person to go through a procedure that might restore them to health. And here's the simple ruling. Once xenotransplants have been fully authorized by the appropriate medical and governmental bodies, Jews may avail themselves of the benefits of non-human tissues, organs, and glands for grafts and transplants. The halakhic obligation to safeguard life requires the Jew to consider a xenograft or a xenotransplant without concern that such a procedure is intentional Jewish law or tradition. It is not. Nevertheless, the decision to pursue such a therapy remains that of the patients and those within their immediate circle of concern. I.e., what is he saying? It's still a risky procedure. You are not obligated to do it, but it is permissible. Okay. It's like many, hey, just the decision I had to make to go for the bone marrow transplant, it was a risky procedure. I was not required by Jewish law to say, yes, go forward with the transplant, but it was a risky procedure, but I chose to do so. Okay. Any comments or questions on this topic? Okay, no one? All right. Then we're going to stop there and move on in a moment to our next topic, which we'll be discussing for a few weeks. One cannot talk about the past presidential and other elections without noting how the transgender issue has become a very public discussion, and how the transgender issue has been on the agenda of many of the candidates, and we'll see in Judaism. All right. So something that many years ago was not discussed, was seen as very odd, and was not generally accepted. We've seen in certain parts of society, I would say, a greater sense that there are those who are much more accepting and those who are not. This is really, as it's been sometimes called, a wedge issue, right? Let's call it a wedge issue that really distinguishes different groups. So how do we understand it? What do we do in Judaism? Well, what I want to do, we're going to look at several texts. I want to start with two popular articles. When I say popular, articles, one that appeared in the New York Times and one that appeared in the National Review. We'll see some of the arguments that are made in the more popular press, and then we'll go into detail. The Committee on Jewish Law and Standards there are two teshuvot, two responsum that they have authored. We're going to take a look at more detail at the second one. You see, those of you who received the text, sorry I got it out a little late, but there were two newspaper articles, and then there were two teshuvot of the Committee of Jewish Law and Standards, one by Rabbi Meir Rabinowitz from some years ago. I didn't even think about this. I was sitting behind him yesterday at the funeral for Rich Rosen's father at Temple Beth Shalom in Teaneck. He's actually one of my Talmud teachers at the seminary. One written by Rabbi Rabinowitz, Meir Rabinowitz, and a more recent one written by Rabbi Sharzer. We'll note that in both cases of those teshuvot, there were a large number of abstentions, even though they were passed, which I think indicates some ambivalence among some of the colleagues who were involved in it, which is something I want to take a look at in more detail. But I thought a good starting place would let's take a look at the two, shall we say, more extreme positions. We're going to take a look at a Reform position, and then we're going to take a look at an Orthodox position, and then we'll look at the conservative position, right? By the way, just, have any of you felt that your opinions about transgender have changed over the years? Why is that? Yeah, Rini?
Well, my positions about homosexuality have changed over the years as well, because I got to know more and more people who were homosexual and were just perfectly fine people. I mean, there was nothing. What they did in their lives doesn't affect me what I do in my life. It's just like any other person in your life. And transgender, I have a friend whose grandson was his granddaughter, became his grandson, and is a much happier person. So you just have to look at the real people, and then it's different from just a category. If you know real people, that makes a big difference.
Okay, I think it's a fair statement. Anyone else? Yeah, Tammy?
My niece is now my nephew, and he said that when he was 5 or 6 years old, always felt that something was wrong and something was different. And he is now in a practice. He's a psychologist, and he takes care of LBGQ people. And he's doing a really, really great thing by counseling these people. And he's very happy.
Okay. Anyone
Yeah,
else?
this is Sima.
Oh, Sima, go ahead, please.
Yeah, I actually watched the show I Am Jazz. I don't know if anyone else would have gone to that, but I did it purposely because I did want to learn about transgender, and I watched it to the bitter end. And it's you do learn the whole, process just like everyone else has said so far, Reedy, and as far as knowing from a very
You're
young
fading out,
age.
Sima. Go ahead.
Oh, knowing from a very young age and being much happier. But it is a struggle, and that's what's so hard for me to accept. It's just such a struggle, and it's not quite exactly what they want, but they do go through the changes, and they are happier. So I don't know.
Okay. Anyone else? Yeah, Carol?
One of my grandchildren's friends, whom I knew as a boy, has now a girl, and I admit to having difficulty with her, keep remembering her as a boy, and it's an adjustment for me.
Right. So, but what's interesting here is that almost all of you are basing it on personal interaction with individuals, mostly in your families that have caused these changes. And I would argue, 50 years ago, what were society's attitudes and how that has changed. So there's this indication of when you know someone and you see that the change has made the person happy or more adjusted, that's a very positive aspect. So how would that fit into Judaism, which we have seen very clearly likes distinctions, right? The food is either kosher or not kosher, right? The day is either Shabbat or the day of the week. How, and certainly, and we're going to have to try to explain this, in traditional sources, you don't see much, if anything, about transgender people. For that matter, you don't see very much about gay people, right? Now, can't be because they didn't exist. We know that they existed, but the question is how they were seen by themselves and by society. It's an interesting topic, and it is a very emotional one. Let's be very direct. Some of the ads in the recent political campaign played upon fear and concern and rejection of transsexuals. That's, by the way, that seems to have worked very well, right? I mean, there was an ad that was played 30,000 times by one of the campaigns. So there's this question of we have a very human sense of acceptance. So how does that fit into Judaism, which clearly, this is very clear, has two issues. One, distinctions, and very little history, and then there are the very practical questions we're going to have to ask. Practical questions such as, is it acceptable for transsexuals to have operations? There are certain issues in Judaism about taking care of your body and not disfiguring it. Are those operations acceptable? Another issue, and we'll see some of these other issues. We have very different set of requirements in Jewish law for males and females. Now, with the conservative movement, we've become more egalitarian, but traditionally there are very different, not only roles in the family, but specific obligations that apply to one and not the other. How do you figure those? All series of questions, and they have certainly been on in front of us in the last few years. So, any other comments or questions before we start taking a look at some things? Yeah, Rini, is that your hand? Yes.
Yeah, do you think that the reason that some of these issues or all of these issues are not mentioned in the Talmud or biblical writings is because people hid the fact that they felt that way?
There's no question that the most common response to these sorts of things was to hide it because there was a societal rejection. And
it says in the Bible, thou shalt not lie with same. It says in there that you should not be gay.
What? No. It says that two men should not have penetrative sex with each other.
Okay, so what does that mean?
That does not mean that you can't be gay.
Oh, okay.
That's sometimes something that people misinterpret. There's a very simple it is a very clear prohibition, right? So that prohibition is unquestionably in the Bible. So that's something. I know didn't we have a unit on homosexuality? Yes, we did. How you deal with that, and the question is, there are other clear matters in the Bible. Which do we see them as? Well, there's a human element in the Bible, and the rabbis themselves decided that eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth, and injury for an injury is not to be taken literally. Or do we say that let's just say this was something that is more of the human element, just as we have other things in the Bible. But those are questions. Yes, those are good questions we have to take a look at. Any other comments before we start taking a look at articles and materials? Okay. All right. So just have a little time left. So we'll start with one. We're going to look at two articles. There's an article that appeared in the New York Times, March 2023. And we're going to look at this article, and we're going to look at an Orthodox response to it. This article says, ancient Judaism recognized a range of genders. It's time we did too. That's a fairly strong statement. It's by Elliot Kukla. I always like to find out who the people are, so I did some research. Okay, I know it's from Wikipedia, so take it for what it's worth, but I think it at least gives us some understanding. The first openly transgender person to be ordained by the Reform Jewish Seminary, HUCJIR. By the way, the Jewish Theological Seminary now will ordain people who are transgender. He came out as transgender 6 months before his ordination, 2006, which is quite a while ago, and as this goes. At the request of a friend who was also transgender, he wrote the first blessings sanctifying same-sex change process. That's an interesting question. Do you have blessings for that? Okay, in the Reform Movement's resource manual for gay, lesbian, bisexual, and transgender inclusion. He's a writer. He serves congregations in Toronto, West Hollywood, California, and Lubbock, Texas. Okay. So that's who wrote this article. It appeared as an op-ed in the New York Times a year and a half ago. Okay, so what does he say? Okay, well, actually, he's a rabbi who provides spiritual care to those who are grieving, dying, ill, or disabled. He's working on a book about the power of rest in a time of planetary crisis. Okay, so it sounds like he's a chap. Now he's currently working as some sort of a chaplaincy program. Unclear exactly where. Okay. I'm transgender and non-binary. As a rabbi, I've offered bereavement care for the past 17 years. Okay, that's fine. Over the past few years, there have been countless stories in the news of trans and non-binary young people's deaths by suicide, right? We know that is not uncommon. And it gives two examples, a 14-year-old, a 16-year-old, who was turned by her parents after coming out rejected by your parents. The only way I'll rest in peace if one day transgender people aren't treated the way I was. So that is, again, we're looking at, yes, there are societal issues, and then we're going to look at traditional Jewish issues in terms of how do we interpret some of our traditional text. More than half young people in the United States who are transgender and non-binary seriously consider suicide. So there's he's bringing an argument that is not from Jewish sources, but just a statement of reality. Okay, a study by the Journal of Adolescent Health found that for people younger than 18, receiving gender-affirming hormone therapy was associated with nearly 40% lower odds of having a suicide attempt in the previous year. You know, I'm not going to deal here with the best medical advice about how to treat non-binary or transgender adolescents. I leave that to the doctors, and I think the doctors need to be clear about the best way to do that, okay? But it is true, as he's pointing out, 450 bills have been introduced in 44 states that make it harder for transgender and non-binary youth to get the support, respect, and healthcare they need to survive. This is, as I said, it's become a real wedge issue in American political and societal life. Okay, and he points out, oops, sorry about that. The legislative attack is often framed as a battle between traditional religious values and modern ideas about gender. We've heard that because those who oppose it tend to be on the conservative side of the religious divides in America. But he's going to make a claim, and we're going to see, we're going to get an Orthodox response to this. But we are real people. Judaism, our most sacred texts, reflect a multiplicity of gender. Now, he's going to use certain terminology that does exist in the Talmud. What that terminology means, what it meant for the rabbis, and what it means for ourselves is one of those major issues that we're going to see there are going to be different opinions of, right? There are, okay. And this is where he's going into areas where there will be differences of opinion. He is claiming there are 4 genders that appear in ancient Jewish texts hundreds of times. He is correct that there are terminologies in ancient times, just as in modern times. Babies are sometimes born with indeterminate or not fully formed genitals. Are they males or are they females? Again, Judaism needs to categorize individuals in one way or another. So the rabbis of the Talmud were not unaware of the fact that there are individuals with indeterminate gender based upon their physical genitalia. Okay, hey, that's should not be surprising. The rabbis were very aware of the real world. Okay, so he points out. Now he uses some of these terms, which we're going to see multiple times in our texts. Tumtum, one who is neither clearly male or female, right? Has indeterminate genitals. The doctors aren't sure. Or androgynos, yes, that's in the Talmud. That's an ancient term. Who has both male and female characteristics. That happens in the real world. The rabbis knew about it. Okay. Elonit, considered female at birth, but develops in an atypical direction. And the saris, well, the saris is a eunuch, a male who has been castrated. Okay. They existed in the ancient world. We have them in the book of, in many of our biblical books. There were eunuchs all, around. They were really good they were excellent guards for harems in ancient times. But they existed. Okay. Now, admittedly, some of these, let's be clear, were things that happened at birth. And the saris, the eunuch, that was an intervention that made the change, right? So that wasn't something at birth, Okay. Now he points out there is not an exact equivalence between these ancient categories and modern gender identities. Absolutely correct. The question that he's going to raise, and it's going to be challenged, is to what degree does this ancient categorization shed any light on the current discussion of transgender? Okay. And we'll see that most of the people that we are going to look at will, one way or another, go back to these Talmudic sources. It should not be surprising to us that the rabbis in ancient times were aware of these, but they are clearly not talking about people, as we talk about today, who consider themselves transgender, who have the gender at birth of one sex, but have a different gender identity, right? That's what we're talking about with transsexual. So here's where it gets a little fuzzy. And the question is, can you say, as this author is saying, that the rabbi's recognition of these of the multiple possibilities of physical genitalia, does that mean that the rabbis are accepting that there are multiple genders? Okay. And he points that out. But they show us that people who are more than binary have always been recognized. Yeah, I mean, yes, no question. The rabbis of ancient time, they looked at the world and they saw what it was, and they recognized this. But were they talking about transgender as we are? That's an interesting question. And to what degree does it apply? Okay. Yes, there is a midrash that sees Adam as androgynous. When God created mankind in divine image, creating in the image of God, but then it says creating them male and female. Yes, there is, no question, a midrash that talks about Adam, a single person who's both male and female. That's there. Now, is that just a way of trying to explain a biblical word? Or does that have larger implications? Okay, now, excuse me. I'm sorry, this cold continues. In the Mishnah, anyone who kills or harms an androgynous person who has both male and female genitalia is subject to the exact same ramification as someone hurts a man or woman. Okay, the idea that this type of person is less than fully human is clearly rejected. Okay. The phrases play with the gender identity in Hebrew grammar to poetically express the complexity. Right? The androgynous, the chapter ends with a conversation, whether the androgynous is more like men or women. One of the rabbis suggests that he is created being of her own. Okay. So one of the rabbis says somebody who's androgynous is a unique category. What does that mean? Does that mean that this is a unique category that stands outside totally the categorization of male and female? Or does that mean that this unique category is somewhat equivalent to male and female? Right? That's going to be one of the critical questions that we're going to see. Okay. I've never forgotten this insight. Trans people, especially young trans people, make human uniqueness more visible for everyone. We are all individuals who have distinctive outlooks. True. Trans liberation is a gift to everyone because it extends the categories for what it means to be human. So his argument is that since the rabbis recognize a trans person, now again, it's not a trans person, it's an androgynous person, as a unique category, which they do. The growing wave of anti-trans bills in the United States represents not just a trans crisis, but a humanitarian crisis. Excuse me. History has shown countless times that when a government limits one group's legal rights, it will eventually do the same to other groups. I might be accused of having a trans agenda. I do. And it's the same as my religious and my human agenda. I want trans kids and all young people to survive. So he's pointing out, he's doing it on two levels. One, the public health level. We have a real public health crisis. People are being hurt because of our lack of recognition of trans people. But he's also making this comment, which we'll look at. We'll look at a response to it next week. This question, this sentence. Here's the sentence that's going to be attacked. There are 4 genders beyond male and female that appear in ancient Jews' holy text. Okay, yes, they are distinguished. Non-binary gender is central to understanding Jewish law and literature as a whole. Well, certainly not something that doesn't fit into the category. They're always going to talk about how they talk about it and why they talk about it and whether that has any implications for our discussions about transgender. We'll have to pick up next time. Okay. Comments or questions to this point? Yeah, Tammy.
I just saw an unbelievable movie. It's called The Conclave, and everybody should watch it before the next week because it's the choosing of the next pope, and it's phenomenal cast, and it is related to this topic.
Okay. There is a film about transgender, and I cannot remember its name, that I did watch recently. I'll have to look
This
that
is a good this is a good drama
yeah,
as well.
Yes.
It's made up story, but it's a really good drama.
Yeah, heaven forbid we should get inside the heads of religious leaders who are trying to make a significant decision and see what outside factors influence their decisions, right? That never happens. They're all pure readers of their tradition, right? Okay, thank you for that comment. All right, so now we've seen a strong argument from the liberal side of Judaism. Next week, we'll take a look at a response to that article, which you can see I've sent out to those who want to have the text. All right, any of the comments, questions before we conclude?
Good job.
Okay, thank you. And we'll pick this up next week. And we'll
It seems as though the old rabbis were wiser than many of the people today.
Well, we're going to see next week a counter argument to what we just read. Okay, there is we'll see a scholar, you see those who've got the text, an article that appeared in, of course, the National Review, which is, as some of you know, on the right side of the political spectrum, is going to see. We'll see how convincing are his counter arguments, and then we'll go deeply into the conservative movement's view on all of this. Okay, all right. Have a good day. See
Thank
you
you so
next
much.
week.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thanks a lot.
Ron,
Yes.
I don't know if you're aware, but Jack Granowitz just became a great grandfather, the first number one.
Oh, mazel tov to him. He didn't make it to our class today.
If you speak to, I was wondering what happened. Whenever you're ready to get together, let me know when you're available.
Okay, I'll give him a call and we'll try to follow up with that. Thank you all again. Everybody,
Thank you.
take care.
Take
Bye-bye.
care.